The ultrasound technician's hand froze mid-movement across my swollen belly, her eyes widening at the screen. "Oh my," she whispered. "There are two heartbeats." I felt the blood drain from my face as Marcus squeezed my hands so hard it hurt. Twins. I was having twins. And in that crystalline moment of shock and joy, I knew exactly what I was going to name them: Arya Rose and Luna Grace. The names my cousin Sophie had stolen from me in my previous life. The names that had haunted me through my death and somehow followed me back through rebirth. "Congratulations," the technician said, beaming. "Two healthy baby girls." I smiled, but my mind was already racing 13 months into the past, or was it into the future? Time had become a strange, fluid thing ever since I'd woken up in my 23-year-old body with all the memories of the life I'd lived until 35. The life where Sophie had destroyed everything I held dear. Let me take you back to where this really began. I died on a Tuesday. It was sudden. A massive car accident on the interstate, a semi-truck that jackknifed in the rain, and my small sedan crumpled like paper. I remembered the impact, the terrible grinding of metal, and then nothing. Or rather, everything. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting in my old apartment, the one I'd shared with my first serious boyfriend, David. The calendar on the wall read March 15th, 12 years earlier. I was 23 again, wearing the cheap sundress I'd bought from Target for $15, and my phone was buzzing with a text from Sophie. "Coffee this weekend? Miss you, cuz." The thing about rebirth is that nobody prepares you for it. There's no manual, no guide. You just wake up with two complete sets of memories fighting for dominance in your skull, and you have to figure out which parts of the future you can change and which are set in stone. I spent the first week in a daze, convinced I was having a psychotic break. But then, little things started proving I really had lived this all before. I knew that David would propose in 6 months. I would say no this time. I knew that my Aunt Caroline would have a stroke in 18 months. I could warn her, get her to a doctor. I knew that my career in marketing would eventually flourish if I just stayed the course. And I knew exactly what Sophie was going to do to me. Sophie Martinez, my cousin, my former best friend, the golden child of our extended family. In my previous life, I'd loved her unconditionally. We'd grown up together, shared secrets, planned our futures side by side. Her mother and mine were sisters, so close they'd bought houses on the same street. Sophie was 6 months older than me, prettier, more confident, and always just a little bit better at everything. But I'd never minded, not until I told her the names. It happened when I was 28 in my first life. I'd just gotten engaged to Marcus, a wonderful man I'd met at a work conference, someone who actually listened when I talked and made me laugh until my sides hurt. We'd been dating for 2 years, and when he proposed on a beach in Malibu, I'd said yes without hesitation. Sophie had been my maid of honor, of course. Who else would it be? One evening, about 3 months before the wedding, we were having wine at my apartment. I was giddy, relaxed, happy in a way I'd never been before. And Sophie asked me about kids. "Do you and Marcus want children?" "Eventually," I'd said, curling up on the couch with my glass of Pinot Grigio. "We've already talked about names, actually. Isn't that silly? We're not even married yet." "That's not silly," Sophie had laughed. "That's adorable. What names?" And I'd told her, God help me, I'd told her everything. If we have a girl, we're thinking Arya Rose. Arya because it means air and melody, and Rose after Marcus's grandmother. And if we have twins, which runs in Marcus's family, the second girl would be Luna Grace. Luna for the moon, Grace after my grandmother. Sophie had smiled, clinked her glass against mine, and said they were beautiful names. 3 months later at my wedding reception, Sophie announced she was pregnant. I was happy for her. Genuinely, completely happy. She and her husband Tyler had been trying for a while, and I knew how much she wanted to be a mother. I hugged her, cried with her, told her I couldn't wait to meet my future niece or nephew. But then, 7 months after that, I was visiting Sophie in the hospital, staring down at her newborn daughter, and she said it. "Meet Arya Rose Martinez." My heart had stopped. Completely stopped. "What?" I'd whispered. "Arya Rose," Sophie repeated, glowing with that new mother radiance. Isn't it perfect? The name just came to me one day. I knew the moment I heard it that it was meant for her. Tyler stood beside her, oblivious to my devastation, nodding along. Sophie has such a gift for names, he'd said. I'd smiled, I'd cooed over the baby, I'd said all the right things, and then I'd gone home and cried for 3 days straight. Marcus had been furious. That's your name, he'd said. The name you told her. She stole it. But what could I do? The baby was already born, already named. Confronting Sophie would make me look petty and jealous. Our family would take her side, they always took her side. So I swallowed my hurt and tried to move on, then I got pregnant. It was 2 years later, and Marcus and I had been trying for 6 months when the test finally came back positive. I was ecstatic. We both were. And this time, I didn't tell anyone the name we'd chosen. Not my mother, not my aunt, and definitely not Sophie. When we found out at 20 weeks that we were having a girl, I smiled serenely and told everyone we were still deciding on a name. But Sophie cornered me at a family barbecue when I was 7 months pregnant, her 3-year-old Aria playing nearby. Have you picked a name yet? We have, I'd said. But we're keeping it a surprise until she's born. Sophie had laughed. Oh, come on, you can tell me. I won't say anything. I'd rather wait, I'd insisted. Her smile had tightened just slightly. I'm your cousin, your best friend. You don't trust me? And there it was, the manipulation, the guilt trip. The same tactics she'd used our entire lives to get what she wanted. In my previous life, I'd caved. I'd told her we were naming our daughter Luna Grace. 3 weeks later, Sophie announced her second pregnancy. And 8 months after that, she had another girl, Luna Grace Martinez. I'd confronted her that time. I couldn't help it. Standing in her hospital room for the second time, staring at another baby with another stolen name, something inside me had broken. You took my name again, I'd said quietly. Sophie had blinked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. What are you talking about? Luna Grace. I told you that was our name. The name we'd chosen for our daughter. Oh, sweetie. Her voice had dripped with condescension. I'm sure we just have similar taste. Great minds think alike, right? Sophie, you did this on purpose. Are you really going to start drama right now? Her voice had gotten sharp. While I'm lying here having just given birth? Really, Emma? Tyler had stepped between us. I think you should leave. And I had. Because what else could I do? When my daughter was born 2 months later, we named her Ella Joy. A beautiful name, but not the name I dreamed of. Every time I looked at her, I felt a pang of loss for the name she should have had. Marcus and I had one more child after that, a son we named James. We never tried for more kids. The joy had been tainted somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie was watching, waiting to steal anything else I treasured. And she did steal more. So much more. Over the next few years, Sophie's life seemed to blossom, while mine grew increasingly complicated. She and Tyler bought a huge house with money from a mysterious inheritance she'd never mentioned before. My marketing firm struggled after losing a major client. Sophie's children were enrolled in the best private schools. My kids went to public school because we couldn't afford anything else. At family gatherings, Sophie would talk about her perfect life while I sat quietly, feeling smaller and smaller. Then came the business idea. I'd been working on it for 2 years, a specialized marketing consultancy focused on eco-friendly brands. I'd done all the research, created the business plan, even started building a client list. It was going to be my comeback, my way of finally stepping out of Sophie's shadow. I made the mistake of telling her about it at Thanksgiving dinner when I was 31. That sounds amazing, she'd gushed. You have to tell me more. Let's do lunch this week. We'd met 3 times over the following month. I'd shown her everything, my business plan, my client prospects, my marketing strategies. She'd been so encouraging, so supportive. Finally, I'd thought, finally, she's being the cousin I always needed. 6 months later, Sophie launched her own marketing consultancy, Verde Strategies, specializing in eco-friendly brands. She used my business plan, my strategies, even my tagline. And because she had more money, better connections, and that magnetic personality that drew people to her, Verde Strategies was an instant success. My consultancy never got off the ground. By the time I could afford to launch, Sophie had already cornered the market. Every client I approached had either already signed with Verde or told me they were considering it. I confronted her at her office, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. "You stole my business idea." Sophie had looked up from her designer desk in her glass-walled office, perfectly calm. "Emma, there's room in the market for both of us. You took my plan, my exact plan, the one I showed you." "Business ideas aren't copyright," she'd said coolly. "And honestly, Emma, you're being paranoid. This idea isn't even that original. Lots of people are moving into green marketing." "But you used my research, my contacts." "Contacts are shared in this industry. That's how networking works." She'd stood up, smoothing her expensive skirt. "Look, I'm sorry you're upset. But maybe if you'd acted faster, been more decisive, this wouldn't be an issue. You can't blame me for your own hesitation." That was when I really understood. Sophie wasn't just thoughtless or accidentally hurtful, she was calculating, deliberate. She took things from me because she could, because she knew I wouldn't fight back, because our family would always make excuses for her. And they did. When I tried to tell my mother what Sophie had done, she'd sighed and said, "Oh, honey, you're being too sensitive. Sophie would never do that intentionally. You two just think alike." My Aunt Caroline had been even worse. "You've always been a little jealous of Sophie, Emma, ever since you were children. Maybe it's time to work on that." Jealous. As if I was the problem. As if watching someone systematically dismantle your dreams was something to get over. The final blow came 3 years before my death, when I was 32. Marcus's company had relocated him to Portland, and we'd decided to sell our house and move. It was a beautiful house, a craftsman-style bungalow we'd spent years fixing up. We'd poured our savings into it, and the market value had increased significantly. We listed it for $650,000, expecting a bidding war. Sophie and Tyler came to the open house. "This place is gorgeous," Sophie had said, walking through the rooms I'd painted and decorated. "You've done such an amazing job, Emma." 2 days later, our realtor called. "I have some strange news. Your cousin has made an offer on the house." "What?" "Sophie Martinez. She's offering $625,000, but she wants you to accept by tomorrow, and she wants a 2-month close so she can secure her financing." I'd been furious. The offer was under asking price, and the quick decision timeline was clearly designed to prevent other offers from coming in. But Sophie knew we needed to close quickly because of Marcus's job. She was exploiting our situation. "Tell her no." I'd said. We'd gotten other offers eventually, but none as high as we'd hoped. The market had shifted, and we ended up selling for $615,000, less than Sophie's offer. We lost money on the closing costs. Sophie bought a different house, a bigger, better one, 3 weeks later. And at a family dinner, she'd smiled sweetly at me and said, "I'm so sorry we couldn't work out the deal on your place. I really did love it. But we found something even better." That was Sophie's gift. Plausible deniability. She could stab you in the back while smiling, and somehow make you feel crazy for bleeding. The years that followed were a slow erosion of everything I'd built. My marriage stayed strong. Marcus was my anchor through all of it, but financially, professionally, emotionally, I struggled. Sophie's star kept rising while mine seemed to dim. And then came the accident. The rain, the truck, the end. Except it wasn't the end. Now, sitting in that ultrasound room with Marcus beside me and 2 tiny heartbeats echoing on the monitor, I had a chance to rewrite everything. I knew Sophie's playbook. I knew her strategies, her manipulations, her pattern of theft, and I knew exactly how to beat her. This time, I didn't tell David I'd say no to his proposal. I broke up with him 3 weeks after my rebirth, citing incompatibility. This time, when Aunt Caroline started complaining about headaches, I personally drove her to the doctor and insisted on a CT scan. They found the aneurysm early and repaired it. She sent me flowers every week for a month afterward. This time, when I met Marcus at that same work conference 2 years later, I held nothing back. I loved him harder, faster, more completely. We were engaged within a year and married 6 months after that. And this time, when Sophie announced her first pregnancy at our wedding reception, I hugged her genuinely because I knew what was coming and I wasn't afraid anymore. When she had her daughter and named her something completely different, Olivia Claire, I'd smiled because I hadn't told her any names. I'd told no one. Olivia is beautiful, I'd said, holding the baby. And I meant it. Sophie had looked almost disappointed that I hadn't shared my own baby plans. Now, 2 years into this second life, I was 25 and pregnant with twins. Sophie had one daughter, no stolen business, no stolen house, and no idea that I remembered everything she'd done in a future that no longer existed. The revenge I'd planned wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. It was about taking back what should have always been mine and making sure Sophie could never steal from me again. 2 girls, Marcus said, his voice choked with emotion as we left the ultrasound appointment. Emma, we're having 2 girls. I know what I want to name them, I said. He looked at me, waiting. Aria Rose and Luna Grace. His eyes widened. Those are perfect. But, should we tell anyone? Oh, we're telling everyone, I said. We're announcing it at dinner tonight. That evening, I called my mother and told her to organize a family dinner for the weekend. We have big news, I said. The dinner was at my parents' house, a tradition for major announcements. Sophie and Tyler were there with 2-year-old Olivia, my Aunt Caroline and Uncle Robert, my younger brother Daniel, a full audience. When dessert was served, Marcus stood and clinked his glass. We have an announcement, he said, grinning. Emma and I are expecting twins, 2 girls. The table erupted in congratulations. My mother cried. Aunt Caroline hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. And we've already picked names, I said clearly, looking directly at Sophie. Aria Rose and Luna Grace. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. Those are beautiful, my mother gushed. Rose was Marcus's grandmother, wasn't she? And Grace was mine, I added. The names are really meaningful to us. We've had them picked out for years. I watched Sophie's face cycle through emotions. Surprise, calculation, and then, just for a moment, frustration. She knew. On some level, she knew I'd just blocked her. How lovely, huh? She said, her smile tight. Very unique. They're not unique, I said cheerfully. They're classic. That's what we love about them. Over the next few months, as my pregnancy progressed, I made sure to mention the names constantly. I bought personalized nursery decorations with Aria and Luna painted on them. I posted about it on social media. I told every single person we met. The names were mine, publicly, irrevocably mine. Sophie got pregnant again when I was 7 months along. At a family barbecue, she announced it with less fanfare than usual. Tyler and I are expecting, she said. Another girl. Everyone congratulated her, but there was a strange tension in the air. Because everyone knew my names, and everyone was watching to see what Sophie would do. Have you picked a name? Aunt Caroline asked. Sophie's jaw tightened. We're still deciding. I smiled and rubbed my enormous belly. Names are so important, I said innocently. I'm so glad Marcus and I chose ours early. It's made everything feel more real, you know? We already talk to Aria and Luna every day. Sophie's hand clenched around her glass of water. The twins came early at 37 weeks. 2 perfect, healthy girls. Aria Rose Bennett, born at 6:42 a.m., and Luna Grace Bennett, born at 6:47 a.m. They were beautiful, tiny and perfect, with wisps of dark hair and Marcus's blue eyes. I held them in the hospital and felt a completion I'd never experienced in, my first life. These were my daughters. Their names were their own. Sophie couldn't touch this. When Sophie visited the hospital 3 days later, she brought an enormous flower arrangement and a strained smile. They're gorgeous, she said, looking down at the twins in their bassinets. Thank you, I said. Meet Aria Rose and Luna Grace. Those names really are something, Sophie said. They're everything, I corrected. They're perfect for our perfect girls. Sophie left after 20 minutes, and I didn't see her again for 3 months, not until her own daughter was born. She named her Harper Jane. It was a lovely name, totally different from mine. And when I visited her in the hospital and congratulated her, Sophie looked at me with something I'd never seen before: respect, and maybe a little fear. She knew I'd beaten her, even if she didn't understand why or how. But the names were only the beginning of my revenge. The real work came over the next 5 years. In my previous life, Sophie's mysterious inheritance had never been properly explained. But in this life, armed with the knowledge of when it would appear, I did some digging. Turned out it wasn't an inheritance at all. It was a business opportunity her father-in-law had offered Tyler, an investment in a startup that paid out massively after 3 years. In my previous life, I hadn't known about the opportunity. This time, when Marcus's own father mentioned a similar investment opportunity in the same startup, I encouraged him to take it. We pooled our savings, borrowed a little from my parents, and invested $50,000. 3 years later, the startup went public, and our investment was worth $800,000. Sophie and Tyler also invested, of course, but the returns were split among more investors this time, and they only made $400,000, still significant, but not the million-plus they'd made in my previous life. With our windfall, Marcus and I bought a house. Not just any house, the exact house Sophie had bought in my previous life, the one she'd said was even better than ours. We got it in a bidding war, offering $50,000 over asking price. When Sophie found out, she called me for the first time in months. "I heard you bought the house on Maple Grove," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "We did. It's incredible. You should come to see it once we're settled." "Tyler and I were looking at that house," she said. "Oh, really? What a coincidence. I guess we just moved faster." I let the words hang there, an echo of what she'd once said to me about the business. There was a long silence. "Well, congratulations," Sophie finally said. "Thank you," I replied. "We're so excited." The business came next. In this timeline, I launched my eco-friendly marketing consultancy when the twins were 18 months old, but this time I didn't tell Sophie anything. I didn't ask for her advice, didn't share my plans, didn't give her any ammunition. I called it Verdant. Marketing, close enough to her Verde strategies from my previous life that it felt like poetic justice, but mine, all mine. I used everything I'd learned from my first life. Which clients to approach, which strategies worked, which partnerships to pursue. Within a year, Verdant Marketing had 15 clients and was grossing $500,000 annually. Sophie noticed. Of course she noticed. She started her own consulting business 6 months after mine launched, Sophie Martinez Consulting, specializing in lifestyle brands. It did okay, but not great. The market was crowded, and she didn't have the advantage of my research this time. At a family Christmas party, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Your business is doing really well," she said. "Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but I love it." "Did you ever think about going into lifestyle brands? I feel like there's so much opportunity there." I smiled. "I'm happy with my niche. Eco-friendly is where my passion is. I just thought, we could maybe collaborate, pool our resources." "That's sweet, Sophie, but I prefer to work independently. You understand?" Her smile was ice. "Of course." I walked away, and I felt powerful. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt powerful around my cousin. But the real climax of my revenge came 5 years after the twins were born, when I was 30. Sophie's consulting business was struggling. She'd overextended herself trying to compete with larger firms, and she'd made some poor financial decisions. At a family dinner, she looked tired, stressed, older than her years. Meanwhile, Verdant Marketing was thriving. I'd hired 3 full-time employees and was considering expanding into corporate sustainability consulting. We just won a major contract with a Fortune 500 company. Then came the dinner party. My mother was celebrating her 60th birthday, and she'd rented out a private room at an upscale restaurant. The whole family was there, 40 people spanning 3 generations. During the dinner, my mother asked me to say a few words about my business. knowing how well it was doing. I stood, holding a glass of champagne, looking around at all these faces I loved. 5 years ago, a bansatig area ago, I began. I started Verdant Marketing with a dream and a lot of uncertainty. I wanted to build something meaningful, something that aligned with my values. And I'm so grateful to say that dream has become reality. Everyone applauded. But I couldn't have done it without the support of my family, especially Marcus, who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Marcus smiled up at me, holding 3-year-old James on his lap while the twins colored in their activity books. And I also want to acknowledge how important it is to trust your instincts and protect your dreams, to not let anyone, even people you love, diminish what you're trying to build. I looked directly at Sophie. Sometimes people will try to take things from you, your ideas, your opportunities, your joy, and you have to decide, will you let them or will you fight for what's yours? The room had gone quiet. I chose to fight. And I'm so glad I did. Because now I have this business, this life, these children. I gestured to my 3 kids, and I have them on my terms, no one else's. I raised my glass. To protecting what matters, to standing your ground, to never letting anyone steal your dreams. Everyone drank, but the energy in the room had shifted. People were glancing at Sophie, who sat rigid in her chair, her face pale. After dinner, she didn't say goodbye. She just left with Tyler and their 2 daughters, her departure quick and silent. I didn't see her for weeks after that. She stopped coming to family events, stopped calling, stopped pretending we were close. And I was fine with that, more than fine. Then 2 months later, my Aunt Caroline called me. "Emma, we need to talk about Sophie." My stomach tightened. "What about her?" "Her business is failing. She's in debt. Tyler lost his job. They might lose their house." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "She asked if you might have any work for her, at your company." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and bitter. "She wants to work for me?" "Emma, she's family. She's desperate." And when I was desperate, when my business idea was stolen, when my names were taken, when I was being undermined at every turn, was Sophie there for me? Silence. "You know she wasn't," I continued. "You know exactly what she did, even if you all pretended not to notice." "That's not fair, Emma. We didn't know." "You knew. You all knew. You just didn't care because it was easier to let Sophie get away with it than to hold her accountable. So you're going to let her suffer, your own cousin?" "No," I said. "I'm going to let her experience consequences." There's a difference. Aunt Caroline hung up on me. But I didn't hire Sophie. I didn't throw her a lifeline. I let her figure it out on her own the way I'd had to in my previous life. Sophie and Tyler eventually declared bankruptcy. They lost the house and moved to a smaller apartment across town. Sophie got a job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, working for someone else, following someone else's vision. She was fine. Not happy maybe, but fine. She had her health, her children, her marriage. She had what she'd earned. Meanwhile, my life blossomed in ways I'd never imagined in my first timeline. Verdant Marketing grew to a team of 20. We opened a second office in Seattle. I was featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. I gave speeches at conferences about sustainable business practices. Marcus's career also flourished. He made partner at his firm 2 years earlier than expected. We paid off our house. We saved for our kids' college funds. We traveled Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, bringing the kids and making memories I'd never had the resources to create in my first life. Aria Rose grew into a confident 7-year-old with a gift for music. She played piano and sang in the children's choir. Luna Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, but brilliant with puzzles and math. James was a whirlwind of energy and laughter, keeping us all on our toes. We were happy, genuinely, completely happy. And the names, those precious names that had haunted me through death and rebirth, they belonged to my daughters. Every time I called them, every time I wrote their names on school forms, every time I heard their teachers say Aria Bennett and Luna Bennett, I felt a deep satisfaction. Sophie couldn't touch that. She couldn't steal it, couldn't diminish it, couldn't claim it as her own. It was mine. At family gatherings, when Sophie did attend, we were cordial, polite, but there was no pretense of closeness anymore. No false friendship, just two women who shared DNA and a complicated history, keeping their distance. Sometimes I saw her watching my kids play, her expression unreadable. Sometimes I caught her looking at me with something like regret. But I never felt guilty. Not once. Because here's what I learned through death and rebirth. Some people are takers. They move through the world extracting value from everyone around them, and they justify it with charm and excuses and the willingness of others to look the other way. Sophie was a taker. She'd taken my names, my business idea, my opportunities, my confidence. She'd taken and taken until there was nothing left. In my first life, I'd let her. I'd been too kind, too understanding, too afraid of conflict. In this life, I protected what was mine. I set boundaries. I fought back, and I won. The twins turned 10 last month. We had a huge party in our backyard, the backyard of the house Sophie had wanted. 50 kids came, running through the garden, eating cake, playing games. Aria performed a piano piece she'd composed herself. Luna gave a speech about her science fair project on renewable energy, a project I'd helped her with using contacts from Verdant Marketing. Marcus stood beside me, his arm around my waist, watching our children shine. "You did this," he said quietly. "You built this life." "We did," I corrected. But I knew what he meant. I'd made choices in this second life that my first self never had the courage to make. I'd protected our family, our dreams, our names. I'd learned that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat. That family doesn't give anyone the right to steal from you. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set a hard boundary and hold it. Sophie's daughters were at the party too. Olivia and Harper, now 12 and 7. They were sweet kids, and I didn't blame them for their mother's sins. They played with Aria and Luna, laughing and carefree. Sophie stood apart from the main group of parents, talking quietly with Tyler. She looked older than 32, worn down by years of struggle she'd never expected to face. When she caught me looking, she gave me a small nod. I nodded back. There was no warmth in the exchange, but there was understanding. She knew what she'd lost. She knew why she'd lost it. And I knew I'd won, not just because I had the house, the business, the happy marriage, not just because my children had the names I'd always dreamed of giving them. I'd won because I'd taken control of my own story, because I'd refused to be a victim twice, because I'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life, and I'd used it to rewrite every wrong. That night, after the guests left and the kids were asleep, I sat in the nursery that had once held 2 cribs but now served as a reading room. The walls still had the hand-painted murals I'd commissioned when I was pregnant. One wall showing a beautiful girl singing to the stars, Aria, and another showing a girl reaching up to touch the moon, Luna. Marcus found me there, sitting in the rocking chair. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm complete." And I was. The names had been the start, but they'd also been symbolic of something larger. My refusal to be diminished, to be stolen from, to be made small. Aria Rose Bennett, Luna Grace Bennett, 2 little girls with names as big as their futures, as beautiful as their potential. My daughters, mine, finally, truly, eternally mine. And no one, not Sophie, not anyone, could ever take that away. Years passed, and the peace I'd fought for remained. The twins started middle school, both thriving in different ways. Aria joined the school musical, landing the lead role. Luna won the Regional Science Olympiad. Verdant Marketing celebrated its 15th anniversary. We'd grown to 50 employees across 3 cities. I'd written a book about sustainable business practices that became a bestseller. I gave a TED Talk that went viral. Sophie and I existed in the same family orbit, but barely. We exchanged pleasantries at holidays. Our children were friendly, but not close. The wounds between us never healed because neither of us wanted them to. The scar tissue was a reminder, a boundary, a permanent record of what had happened and what never would again. At a family reunion when the twins were 15, my mother pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology," she said. I looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For not seeing what Sophie did to you, for dismissing your concerns." for always making excuses for her. My mother's eyes were watery. I saw it, Emma. I just didn't want to deal with the conflict. And that was wrong. I hugged her. Thank you for saying that. You've built something remarkable, she continued. Not just the business, but your life, your family. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I had to be, I said simply. That conversation meant more to me than any business success, any financial milestone. Because it was validation of something I'd known, but never heard acknowledged, I wasn't crazy. Sophie had stolen from me. The family had looked away, and I'd survived it, twice. At the reunion, I watched Sophie from across the yard. She was talking to Aunt Caroline, her posture defensive, her expression tight. Her life wasn't terrible. She and Tyler had recovered financially. Her kids were doing well in school. She had a decent job. But she didn't have the life she'd expected, the life she'd thought she could build by taking pieces of mine. And that was its own form of justice. Arya and Luna approached me, interrupting my thoughts. At 15, they were stunning young women, so different from each other, but both extraordinary. Mom, Arya said, Uncle Daniel wants to know if you'll sing karaoke with him. Absolutely not, I laughed. Please, Luna added. It would be hilarious. I looked at my daughters, Arya Rose and Luna Grace, named with intention, raised with love, growing into exactly who they were meant to be. For you two, I said. Anything. As we walked back toward the karaoke machine, I felt Marcus's hand slip into mine. This was my life. This was my victory. Not because I'd destroyed Sophie, but because I'd protected myself. Because I'd learned from my death that life is too short and too precious to give away to people who don't value you. Because I'd been reborn with knowledge and I'd used it not for cruelty, but for justice. Because when my cousin tried to steal my baby names, I'd had twins and used both names first, and in doing so, I'd reclaimed not just the names, but my entire future. The song started, some cheesy 80s pop hit, and I sang off key with my brother while my daughters laughed and recorded videos on their phones. This was joy, pure, uncomplicated, earned joy, and it was mine, all mine, forever.